Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and today we're looking at the Game of Life. This is made by Marmalade Game Studio in 2015, and it is one of the earlier Hasbro board game to digital version um, trans translations. So you don't even have Hasbro really mentioned here. By hook or by crook, Hasbro managed to get the rights to basically every board game that ever gained any traction in the minds of American United States people. So you inherently, if you're playing any kind of board game, you're probably playing a Hasbro board game, and Hasbro's a pretty awful company, and they've made some pretty awful versions of the Game of Life before. Uh, Later games like Clue, which I've already covered, have DLC in them. In this instance, the Game of Life has no DLC, but then they've made a Game of Life 2 that has a season pass with DLC, which inherently, I guess, that almost makes sense, because if the Game of Life 1 is supposed to just be a direct translation of what the board game was, then there's no room for changing the rules or changing how the game plays to initially include any kind of expansion or DLC. There's very little you could actually change here other than skinning things and having cosmetic changes. You can pretty well tell from the main menu that this is a cell phone port, and they do seem like they're going to add some mini games. Like, there's one called Statues, there's one called Grab the Cash, there's one called Spin the Win. Those obviously wouldn't be in the board game. The most messed with board game that Hasbro has tried to put in digital multiple times and failed multiple times is Monopoly. There are a few ports of Monopoly that's actually pretty good, but a lot of them are pretty bad, and they just frankly flood the market with them. And at one point, Hasbro had kind of given up, at least for console gamers, the idea of selling board games at such a premium. In the real world, they still cost $10 or more to buy a board game for something that, at the scale that Hasbro must be making board games at, is probably costing them less than $1.50. But yeah, there's seemingly no controller support in the menu. There's no options other than music, sound effects, and languages. And I guess it might be useful to see how many different languages they covered. That's a decent amount. You could play online if you really got into Game of Life. There is about 5 achievements, and so you probably end up playing the game 2 or 3 times just to get all the achievements. Otherwise, this is like owning a real board game, something that really varies. Your enjoyment will vary very much on just how often you play. If you have a regular Friday night or Wednesday night game night, then yeah, having digital versions of being able to play online might be something. Or if you just absolutely love the Game of Life, which arguably I would say is probably not one of the best games. It's a little too complicated of a game, and we'll get into more of that later, but it's got a lot of pieces. They do have a fast mode and a full mode. So let's, I think, play one full mode, but I think you probably could get all the achievements just playing the fast mode. And then what you're doing is pass and play, so inherently you will have a case here where you have to just add CPUs if you're just going to play solo. So much so that they really didn't even indicate that you could play solo. So we've got little mopeds, single seat scooters that we're starting with. And we've got a male and a female start color. Pink being the female because she's wearing a skirt, and blue being male because he's wearing a striped shirt. And so let's just add 4 CPUs, and let's just hop into the game. Yep. What you would want to see here is some nice polish for what looks like a cell phone game being ported to PC. This definitely does not look exactly like the board of the Game of Life, but it may be the board. It may just be that they've taken a lot of effort here to visualize it and maybe move some spaces around while still having the same number of spaces. So one thing I definitely recognize is using the mouse to spin here. It was difficult and I failed immediately. I've probably only played the Game of Life once in the real world, and maybe 2 or 3 times digitally otherwise. So we have the guy picking a career to start with, which will give him some income. And in the Game of Life, I don't think you really benefit much from just rushing towards the end. I think you go in circles, basically landing on different things. And notice that he passed a lot of spaces, and those spaces caused things to trigger. Inherently, as soon as you get a better career than everybody else on the controller, I kind of wish there was a way to slow down some of this action. It's a little too automated for a new player. Pick an opponent, both show off your disco moves and spin. The bank pays the highest spinner 50,000. Yeah, this is just like no control here. So I roll a 2, and you roll a 6. And then I'm rolling again, and now I have a 6. And 7. How many times are you gonna spin? 4. So you spin like 3 times. Inevitably here they wanted you to have a spinner for the Game of Life and not dice like Monopoly. Whereas Monopoly is all about real estate, but the Game of Life is kind of slightly more varied in its theme, but it's still kind of doing the same thing. So do you want to start making money, or do you want to go to college? And inherently, like playing this in 2021, going to college is not 100% recommended for 100% of people, particularly if you don't know what you're going to do and you haven't done a lot of research as far as what that job field that you think you want to do is going to be like in the next decade or so. Just going to college to get a standard bachelor's degree, a general degree, is less helpful than it once would be. But I think in this game, preparing early probably is the right move instead of getting a job. And of course, in the Game of Life, this is you've graduated from high school and your only 2 options are to get a job or go to college, which is mostly true. Of course, getting married to someone rich also might be in the cards for a few people. So you just clicked on that to pay the bank. That's a little weird. And I don't know why there's specific spots here on these numbers or why that would stay overall. I think you could certainly see in the Game of Life 2 a scenario. So now I went to college and that sends me the other direction. So we host a comedy competition and we get 50,000 to start with. Okay, you have to click on that. This is very mouse based. So 2 people went immediately to get a job, and then 2 people immediately went to college. It disappears your characters when you overrun them. At some point you're supposed to get a car and kids and get married, and I guess this red dot here probably is where you're going to get a job again. There's no allocations here for dropping out of college or failing college or staying in a college for extremely long amounts of time. I don't think you go past the concept of just having a bachelor's degree. The music here is fine. It could get fairly repetitive. We might want to turn it down later. Like I may want to listen to this the audio on this video after this recording anyways. So I landed on a 2, but I didn't spin it enough. The fact that it's a longer path to get to the end if you go to college is an indication that maybe there is a rush to the end and you're taking a risk. Here we can select 2 cards, but since it's digital and we don't know what they are, we might as well just pick the 2. And I guess you just have college options here. Here we have oh, I see. There's a bonus number, so anytime anybody lands on your on that bonus number, you get a bonus. Interesting. So I could take 120,000 as a lawyer, which is probably like the second to highest job. As politician's probably the highest. And so now I know what that little dot means. Okay. So I want to just roll a 9 always. So I get some kind of payday, which was 120,000. So every time you see that, I really have, I guess, only played the Game of Life once. Alright, so I'm choosing player, but I didn't pay enough attention, so let's just choose green, or let's choose yellow. Let's see. Pick an opponent, both strike, oppose, and spin. Bank pays the highest spinner 70,000. It's basically the same thing over and over again. A lot of randomization here, and certainly there's no case where you randomly get large amounts of money. The amount of money here is also kind of ridiculous. $120,000 for a fresh out of college lawyer maybe is about right, but these other players starting off with $200,000 at the beginning of the game is kind of ridiculous. And so we have these little animations, which are nice, but they're just going to be the same animations over and over again. There was an older version of this, the Game of Life, on Steam that seems to no longer be available for purchase, and it apparently ran so poorly. It's not like standards are particularly high. This is just a board game. In all fairness, this is a board game that you probably should only get for like $5 or less on Steam, and there probably should be some kind of Hasbro bundle. But I think also Hasbro has their own little website for their own games, and they would much rather have you go to that. It's probably HasbroFamilyGameNight.com or something like that. And that way they don't have to pay the 30% cut to Steam every time they sell a game. This is also, like most board games, a better option, a better concept certainly for a game on a cell phone or a tablet that you can play on the go versus playing on a PC. And then of course you run into the real question about something like Tabletop Simulator, where that could probably simulate the game of life fairly easily, and you would then just have to maybe buy some DLC to get the right components for the Tabletop Simulator, which I think that's how that works. So you run into this issue as I'm saying it now, where I don't know if the game itself is really worth it. Yeah, this is so awkward. It really just needs a spin button, and so you have to do like a small little flip without going too wild off the screen. We have people just massively collecting this. So apparently this is programmed so you can have gay relationships and still, I guess, adopt kids. So let's try that. Let's get a blue peg and see how that works. But the AI so far, two out of the 3 AIs have all gone with heterosexual relationships. Which I guess maybe that only would trigger, it might be a case where the last AI may get to this point and then decide to go with a homosexual relationship, since I've unlocked that as an option. But I wouldn't be surprised one bit if it's always they pick the opposite color of whatever they are. So we're spinning for wedding gifts now. So 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. Man. I will say that in real life, there is kind of a high amount of gifts you can get from getting married, and there are significant tax write-offs from being married. You're shipwrecked on a desert island. That seems like that's a fairly silly spinner thing. So I just want a 6 or something between 6 and 10, and I failed, so I got 20,000. Everyone's getting money, so it's just like more money, more money, more money. Whereas if this was more like Monopoly, you would definitely have people losing money way more often. Maybe the idea here in making the game of life was to kind of copy Monopoly, but make it a little bit more happy-go-lucky, a little bit more accessible by non-real estate minded people. So pilot is an 8. I don't think there's really any reason why you'd ever take a lower paying job unless there's something special in the event cards that you know about, and that would only come with playing the game of life multiple times. So there's an achievement for this. So you click the left mouse button to move the peg forward, stop when the guard turns around, or you'll be sent back to start. Okay, so this is red light, green light, basically. And there's an achievement for doing this without getting noticed. But the fact that there's only three things. Which character am I? 2, 1. I don't even know who I am. I guess I'm down here at the bottom. Okay. So I totally messed that up. But honestly, I think I would have maybe gotten the achievement anyways. For not being spotted and sent back had I just not played at all. You can see compared to like a Mario Party game, the fact that there's no confirmation boxes, there's no OK buttons, there's no tutorial mode here that would happen in the first gameplay, is certainly lacking. And that's something that a little bit more time, a little bit more polish, and just logic would help. There's not a good onboarding process here. They just assume you know how their game specifically works before you've even played it. And particularly in that mini game, those mini games don't exist in the board game version. Pick an opponent, shake hands, and take turns to spin. Bank pays the highest spender 70,000. Yeah, honestly, I think it would be very easy to have had controller support here. You're not really asking the player to do much. Yeah, a lot of events happening here, and I'm falling fairly far behind. Not as bad as the red player, but I could certainly see a lack of interest around playing a game that is all around a spinner or a dice roll. There's a lot more logic with building hotels and deciding whether you're gonna buy something or put it up for auction in Monopoly. If anything, I'd say the Game of Life feels a lot like Candyland, just slightly more mature visually, and Candyland is kind of the exact scenario of randomness. The board itself gives the impression that very little happens. It's weird that you can't drag and drop the money. Yeah. So this definitely leaves me in a position where I'm not sure if I'm unimpressed because Marmalade Studios did kind of a mediocre job, or if I'm unimpressed just because the Game of Life is kind of unimpressive. This is where playing the Game of Life 2 would be very useful to see what has been added, what has been changed. So a fashion designer is a number 10 job. Interesting. I almost feel like you also would be benefited if you could just have 4 computer players all play each other to get the achievements. But maybe you would never get the achievements on that route. So that gave me 20,000, not 120,000. Why did it not give me 120,000? I guess you only get 20,000 when somebody lands on your bonus number. You also have this rainbow of colors, but the rainbow of colors don't seem to mean anything, really. There's also kind of some obvious just mentality, standard normal human life mentality where you you get married, then you buy a house after cutting out of college, then you have kids. The good old-fashioned American dream: have 2.5 kids and a dog, and frankly, a lot of that is BS in the line. It doesn't work for a lot of people, and it's not guaranteed. It's not a guaranteed way for happiness or success. So I don't know what buying a house would do for me. Seems like that would just cost me money, but perhaps you can't have kids until you buy a house. And so we have an eco house for $200,000. And we have a windmill for $350,000. So this seems kind of comedic, and perhaps there should be some more comedy around that. I guess we buy the expensive house, and then if we sell the house now in bankruptcy, we could get some money back if that's necessary. Alright, they spun on me again, so it gets me another $20,000. So it's taken that player an incredibly long amount of time to reach even the marriage stage. Take note that there's no divorce, which you'd think a more modern game version of this would throw in the idea of divorce. And you could do that cutesy and just say it didn't work out, go back to the beginning, or you need more education, go back to the very beginning of the game. That moving the pegs backwards, I think, would affect some things, certainly. Also jumping some pegs forwards would affect some things. I think there probably is a flaw in the game of life that you do cross a certain line, and then that is just that. As if each one of these pegs equals a year. So we're spinning for buried treasure now. But yeah, a divorce could certainly be a major factor. Like 50% of all marriages nearly in the United States end in divorce. So that could cut your entire money in half. Let's see, 100,000. Why did I get 100,000? Just because I landed on a 10 for the treasure hunt? I guess that's it. Everybody else has 700,000 plus in cash. If they had just divided by 10, this would have been probably a more accurate amount of money. Having potentially $78,000 in cash and a $50,000 house as a starter house might be a lot more logical. Some of the money elements certainly need rebalancing to be more realistic, but if you rebalance them to be realistic, then the shocking surprise here is that the game of life would be impossible to win if the numbers were accurate to the actual cost of things. Right. So night school path to get another job, or life path. So if you had taken a career at the very beginning, then you wouldn't have had an education, and so you wouldn't have gotten the couple of paydays that you went over early. But for me, being a number 9 job, it makes a lot more sense to go with the life path. And that's kind of weird too, because it was never part of the American dream to go to night school and then work on a degree even more. It is certainly part of the idea of Americans overworking themselves, though, to work potentially a full-time job, which is what you'd have to be working to get the amount of payouts as salaries that you're getting. And I guess, yeah, these are either annual salaries, and each one of these represents a year, which then would kind of indicate that each yellow pip is a quarter of a year. But yeah, the idea of working a full-time job and going to night school is something people often are forced to do, but it's not something that people should be forced to do, and it's not something to probably highlight in a video game. In the same way, we don't have a path here where you can get addicted to drugs or alcohol or gambling or take jobs such as prostitution or lose jobs completely. I guess we need to target red. Let's see. I guess the way a lot of these event cards, when you're picking someone to compete against, puts you in a it's in a win-win scenario, so you should probably just pick the lowest person and try to bankrupt a player as early as possible if you can. But I don't think too many players actually do bankrupt in the game of life. I'm gonna be interested to see how many actual achievements unlock with just playing one game. I wouldn't be surprised if it's nearly half of them. But in all fairness, I don't know how many times I really would want to play this anyways. It's just a little too simplistic. And that certainly is the thing with most board games, is that board games make a lot more sense if you can go down to a game store or comic book shop or a friend's place or community meeting and communal group like a YMCA or something. Having the game of life then that is split between 100 different kids each year would allow lots of different people to play it. But when you really don't need any board game on your shelf if it's just between you and your family, unless it's just a board game you really, really love. Of course, it might be a great way to avoid watching Netflix or TV if you're trying to avoid that, and there's certainly the case that there might be some families that really, really love a specific board game. I don't think the game of life would ever be a specific board game that anybody really loves, though. But yeah, you even, interesting, you can get fired. You really do see a case here. I think he got the same job back. That even when you buy the actual physical cardboard versions of board games, that they are designed specifically to be very disposable. So you can the pieces are small and plasticky, so they can be broken and lost. The money is cheap and papery. There are higher classes of board games you can get in collector's editions, but then they become so fancy that you kind of don't want to play with them. I bought a collector's edition of Clue that was very, very fancy, played with it exactly once, and then gave it away in hopes somebody else would play with it more. And that was a fairly fancy version. I believe the different characters were made out of silver coating or gold coated pieces, and they were actually metallic characters and not plastic. But it was certainly a big space waster. I guess if somebody rolls a 10 in one of those challenges, you then can just match them and then maybe you have to re-roll. The game is failing to like do anything with the mouse cursor also. Usually games will put in a custom mouse cursor and disappear it and hide it when it's not your turn, or change it to like a spinning hourglass or something like that. Seemingly you don't get pets. You don't get large collections of tools or collectibles or anything like that that you could spend a lot of money on. You don't get fancy cars or get deep into buying and selling houses and trading out houses over and over again. Which that certainly can be a case where you can end up moving every 3 or 4 years and costing yourself a lot of money, because that's not how mortgages work. But then often you have no control over that because you're moving to different places to get different jobs, and it becomes this cycle of, well, you've got to move to a new place to get a better job to move forward in your career. Because you've moved up and forward in your career, you have to buy or you feel the need to buy a bigger house, thus more money goes to the banks in the long run. And that kind of mentality works good when there's a boom and works terribly when there's a bust. I'm a little surprised how close these guys still are, and the fact that I'm somewhat catching up. I would have thought that some of these would already be at like 100, like 1.2 million. Let's see. So share your favorite locations, and you take pictures in a location of a nature beauty. Spin red to collect 70, spin black to pay bank 70. So there's a secondary color wheel here. So there probably is also some something you could do with the color here. This isn't a very colorblind friendly game, like just with the spinner. The rest of it works fairly well, although the cheap plastic pegs that are blue and pink might very well just look gray to colorblind people also. Yeah, I don't know how you'd really improve the game of life other than just start to add a whole lot more to it. Like, put some more variety, put some different paths, put some more branches. Now there's achievement for having more kids, and oddly, I believe at the end of this game, having more kids at the end of the game gives you more money, which that doesn't make any sense at all, because having kids is always more expensive than it's worth. It might give you some tax rebates here and there, but it's never really worth it. Alright, so choose a house option. If we were to sell the house, we've got that house. We buy it for 350, we'll sell it for 500. So you have a little bit of animation on that. 1, 2, 3. So we lost 50,000 in that sale. But that did catch me up. Now I'm in second place. The animations that happen here and the graphics here are definitely targeted towards cell phones. They're repetitive, and there's just not enough here. What I'd oddly think about comparing this game to is something like Plague Inc., which is a plague simulator where you play as a plague trying to infect and kill all the humans on the planet. What happens in that I would say is missing here is that there's just constant like Twitter-like news feed that is happening at the top of Plague Inc., and it is just a large collection of like current events to bring life and a personality to the world that's happening in that game. Plus there are actual in-game triggerable random events that happen that pop up little pop-up boxes that much like the cards that we're seeing here, but the cards that we're seeing here often don't seem to actually have events that would establish what kind of world this is and what's kind of going on in this world. I want a little bit of a narrative in this board game, which is a little weird certainly, but a randomized narrative would make sense. Like if it had randomly said that there was a housing boom and all houses are going to be worth double their price if you can sell them in the next 2 turns, that would be cool. Or a bubble burst and houses are worth less. That would be cool too. And certainly in 2021 it is starting to get really, really a bad idea to have 4 kids. Even having 2 kids may be a little too expensive. Hold and drag the left mouse button to move the peg. Collect as much cash as possible while avoiding loans. So we're going to do a different mini game. There clearly should have been more mini games too. So I'm down here. Alright. Alright, so I'm avoiding the red things, grabbing cash, and it does play a little bit of a sound effect. Of course, there is that possibility here that you would misinterpret the sound effects, and I'm actually grabbing loans and not cash. So I got 21 with 5, which that brought me all the way down to 0. Wow. And that definitely doesn't control well. So Marmalade Studio is not doing a great job with programming all of 3 mini games. Compare that to something like Mario Party, which has dozens of mini games. The one thing I would complain about Mario Party about is that it can be long and kind of infinite, but Mario Party does have Nintendo characters to make it much more interesting and a lot more characterization of those Mario characters to make you actually relate to the characters you're playing as compared to these little pegs. It would be really smart to, instead of having pegs, introduce characters, just real people. And since it's Hasbro, why not just introduce characters from other games? Why not? Why not have cross DLC that says if you own Monopoly, you get all the Monopoly pieces and you can use them as the tokens in Game of Life. If you own Cluedo, you can get all the Clue pieces and use it. I think Clue in particular, having little statues of Professor Plum and all of those characters would make a lot more sense. And then you could have the idea that you have this ensemble cast that shows up in mini games in the same way that Mario and his people always show up in other kinds of games. I don't think you really have enough time to react, and take note how the audio just reset there. They don't even have the audio long enough. So you kind of have to just not push it at all. Yeah. So you have to just kind of hope that you're not going to get caught and stop early. And we're now all into $1 million, which is an unrealistic amount of money to assume that 4 random people would have. I suppose the indication here is that this is San Francisco because you have a bridge here that is the spitting image of the San Francisco bridge. But if that's the case, then the money that they're getting is actually too little, and the expenses are too little. And frankly, I don't know how many native-born Californians that living in San Francisco stay in San Francisco and succeed. So I'm trying to get kids. So we go to the hospital and get an animation. And then we end up with a random girl. I don't think you get to pick what gender you get. You could certainly also throw in a concept here, and any of these may actually be implemented, or better ideas than this may be implemented in the game of life too. But yeah, so the helicopter brings the babies if you get it somewhere else. If this was a multi-generational game where the first time you played, you were playing as a named character, and then the second time you played, you're playing as one of the offspring of that named character. We've seen that trick done in other games, and it often doesn't really affect much, but it can just make you care more about the people you're playing as. And there was a brief time there where they tried to sell board games that had stickers that would change how the board game was played, thus effectively ruining the board game eventually, so that you would have to buy a new one. And it was a fairly blatant attempt by Hasbro to get more money. Hasbro always comes off as incredibly sleazy and greedy, which, yeah, it's not a good look. I would definitely try to buy a non-Hasbro board game before I bought a Hasbro one. Hasbro also owns Magic the Gathering, which is perhaps the epitome of greediness as far as constantly selling reprints of the same cards and trying to find new and exciting ways to rip off people. Right. You invent a new fruit. How do you invent a fruit? It's half kiwi, half banana. Spin to see how many you sold. Collect 10 times your spin from the bank. So if I can get 10, that'd be great. Wonder if maybe I'm supposed to be dragging it downward. I'll try that next time I spin. We've been going about 50 minutes, which is probably about the time that I feel like even a full game should start to wrap up. Of course, inherently, if you're playing with real people, you're going to move slower, you're going to talk, you're going to have fun and conversation. All of that is missing if you're playing online, where I'm sure there's no chat. So you'd have to get some third-party chat app like Discord to do that. And yeah, I wouldn't be upset spending 2.5 hours playing a board game with real people, friends and family, but playing against computers, you kind of want it to be a snappier. Not that I've seen any major slowdowns here, I just think the game itself is particularly slow. It's just a little too many steps. You could probably get rid of each repeated yellow spot and reduce it down, or just double the number of steps you move forward based on what you roll. Alright, pull down. Yeah, pulling down worked way better. Well, I wish they had told me that, particularly when I messed up. Spin for a baby. Which one gets me a baby? Well, I got a number 5, and so that was a boy. So does that mean all the reds were boys and all the browns are girls? I don't think there's any difference between getting a boy and girl in the game. That would be fairly sexist if that was the case. See, I'm trying to get the achievement where you have 4 kids, which I believe is the maximum you can have. Yeah, it definitely feels kind of crazy to have 4 kids. Like you're outnumbering yourself even if you have 2 kids. Which, of course, that's an odd way of thinking about it, but in a lot of scenarios, it's exactly what it's going to be. Being outnumbered by your kids is going to run into more conflict. I'm going to have a choice here, obviously, between the risky road and the safe road. And they took the risky road and they lost 100,000, which apparently that's the only point where you can really lose a lot of money. And losing 100,000 isn't even that much. I guess the real question is, does the money matter at all, or do you just get to the end of the game and that's that? Like, see, in Candyland or Snakes and Ladders, I believe you just kind of get to the end of the game. Nope, even me dragging it down is still not doing it. Every action I'm trying to make is pretty much not working here. And then they probably should just give me the money in that scenario. There's no reason to make me click on it. Yeah. You can kind of just play this whole game on autopilot. So oddly, that time it did work. So it almost feels like when you're spinning the move, if you drag down, it works well for you. But if you're doing other things, it may not work for you. You see, like pausing there, that's kind of a great example of where it would be helpful. Alright, so we just want to pick the cheapest person. Let's see, bank pays the highest spinner, 70,000. So you want the one with the least amount of money, so you help the other person if you lose. Now that everybody is approaching $1.5 million, getting 70,000 is unimportant. It would be very easy, frankly, for Hasbro to just introduce Hasbro bucks. Like an H with 2 lines through the middle of it, and then establish a kind of equal baseline of currency amongst all their games. Then you don't have to have them feel anything like a US dollar or a pound or euro, depending on what you're most familiar with, because I'm seeing 1.3 million something, and I'm assuming that's US dollars, which that number doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, this is so ridiculous. There definitely should be a spin button so that you're not having to try 3 or 4 times to spin each time. Yeah, these little annoyances certainly are the things that will stop you from wanting to play this more than once. By the way, what does this do? Oh, this lets us drag around the map. So let's just see where we're gonna end up anyways. Like, they're going down this way, and your final pitch is to buy a moderate house or a mansion. You can zoom out with the mouse wheel, but it's particularly slow. Yeah, and the idea of starting on the boardwalk doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, it definitely feels like this should have an option to go back and play again, and it should just force the people to go in circles. Although it has been about an hour, so like the timing is about right. I'm not sure you don't want to roll low though, because more events might mean more money. It's like 50-50. Plus an event like that is not going to really change much when you're talking 30,000. It almost feels like what you should have here is an inflation counter that goes up each turn. So maybe like a 3-sided dice that you roll, or it goes up to 1, then a 2, then 3, then goes back to 1, and at that point it would be like deflation. Because a lot of these events, collecting 50 from a bank, just don't make any sense. Or you'd have, maybe it would make sense if you drew 3 cards, but then they would have had to written more cards, and clearly they didn't do that. Do I have any chance of winning here? It depends on, I guess, whether the kids are worth anything. I still would like to get one more kid to get that achievement. I feel like I'm gonna play this game off screen, potentially, to try and get all the achievements if I can't get them. I want to try the fast mode, but after that, I don't think I'll probably ever play it. But just like owning this in the real world, I can't really hate that I own this digitally. At some point, somebody might want to play the game of life, and now I've saved myself by spending $10 potentially to get it on Steam. I've saved myself spending potentially $10 to have it in the real world, and then having to have a shelf, which would cost me more money, and square footage in a house, which costs me more money. That's something certainly people don't ever think about, is if you're paying, let's say, $10 a square foot for your house every year in mortgage payments, well, if a square foot of that is taking up a $10 is being taken up by a $10 board game and nothing else, because you're not building vertically. So just in this theory, a board game is sitting in a corner taking up a square footage of your room. Well, you've just doubled the cost of that board game. It was $10 to own, sure, but then you just paid $10 to store it. And then the next year you've paid another $10, and then the next year another $10. You could easily go 10, 20, 30 years with that same board game taking up some space, whereas more logically you could have just never bought the board game, saved yourself that initial $10, and even better, not felt the need to buy as big of a house, thus a smaller mortgage payments. Because the mortgage payments certainly are the things, they are the big ticket monthly bill you're going to more than likely see that and feel throughout your life. And having moderate small houses can really save you there. You don't want to be incredibly cramped, but a lot of people can make do, as long as you're not living in like a closet that they're calling a apartment in New York. You're probably doing fairly well. And of course, wherever you live affects how big and how cheap a house might be. So you can often get very big, cheap houses if in a area that doesn't have much of an economy, which can be a problem then, because that never really quite balances out. But there are often people that will live in small towns far away from any place where they can actually get employment that would pay them a decent amount of money, but because they're in this bad economy, perpetual bad economy, small town environment, it keeps the numbers small, and because the numbers are small, they think they're being smart and saving their money, when reality there is some benefit to actually just gambling a little bit and going to a bigger city and getting having higher living expenses for a much higher or even slightly higher income. It is generally nicer for people to be able to lose, say, $10,000 and not have that ruin their life. Whereas if you're living in a small town and you're only making $100,000 a year for an entire family, losing $10,000 bankrupts you. And if you can afford to lose $10,000, then you almost certainly will have more opportunities to gain $10,000 in a better economy, bigger city. This couple didn't ever get any kids, so yeah. And I imagine if I had played this game more than once in my life, I probably would know how much getting the kids actually is going to reward me, if anything. So here we want to... There's a bunch of cards that make you spin the wheel. I wonder if you still have to spin the wheel if you've already run off the board. I guess you do, so even when your game is over, you're still included in the game. That's a smart thought, at least. It does, though, certainly slow down the whole process. You would think that they could afford to have more of a soundtrack than just one song going in circles throughout the entire time, and that they could fade out a song and fade it back in. I'm still not sure what the benefit of getting the bigger house is, though. That might just be a straight up spin. Yeah, I don't see how I'm gonna win here, but I'm the last person, so I'm at 183, or 1,830,000, whereas the next, the highest person is at 93,000. And can we click on any of this and get any information? No. Interesting. So you can't even really look at the stats of the characters that much either. We sold our house, which other people also bought a house and I don't think actually did sell a house. So that's another factor. Okay. So I guess I get to take a pick. Millionaire Mansion or Countryside Acres. Again, very disingenuous here. There are no slums, there are no even small cheap houses that you could end up in. There's no jail. There's no crimes you can commit. There's no living abroad. I guess we'll do Millionaire Mansion. We'll try it, I guess. And we had 3 kids. So now the question mark. He got 400,000 for retirement. He got like 300,000. And he got like 200,000. And I got 100,000. So is that because I retired the latest? I guess that is the case. So the bonus to getting to the end early is a difference of 300,000, which is a decent amount of money, not a lot. And sell the houses. So he sells for either to 180,000 or 300,000. So you just got 300,000. Notice how they're putting a bunch of question marks here so that you can't guess how this is going to go. Interesting. Apparently each character has their own deck of cards. So for every action card you don't play, you get some amount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Interesting. I don't know if you're getting a specific amount for each card or if you're just getting higher bonuses for whoever has the most amount of action cards. And these might have been action cards you played, or this might have been action cards that you didn't play. Maybe it's probably action cards you did play. Very annoying sound effect there. But I didn't do great, so I'm getting basically 1 million more. I don't think I won here, unless the kids change things. Child bonus gives you 50,000 for having 2 kids, which it seems like they're going to animate it as girl kids each time. Well, nope, there's a blue kid. Again, annoying sound effects. So that gave me 150,000, 50,000 for each kid. Not much of a reward there, which that's a little unsurprising. Apparently he had a loan. Now he was the highest, so he may very well have gone below. Alright, so in our first attempt we were beaten by this player, and had it just been 1 versus 1, I had probably a decent chance of winning there, which really goes to show the randomness of this game. It's all very, very random and all very kind of dull. Like, so he had played 11 action cards, I guess, and I had played 10, where this one had only played 7, this one had played 11. And then kids, he had 1, where I had 3 versus 2 versus 0. Which, had he gotten 2, that would have only been 100,000, so it wouldn't have really changed that much. As far as houses went, I bought a house and sold a house, and I don't think there was much of an advantage of selling the house early, other than, I guess, the assumption that maybe you would get lucky and get another house through an action card, which maybe can happen, maybe can't. Your ability to play this game severely is limited by what you know the action cards can do, which I guess that's true for most board games, but usually it's not so blatantly obvious. So yeah, his house sold, and then this one paid back 3 bank loans, whereas nobody else had any bank loans. Then it just brings you back to this, and the audio is way quieter now. Since this is a 2015 game, I assume that online still works. Let's just see. see if we can search. Then I'm gonna back out and not actually play. Yeah, at the moment it doesn't seem like there's a significant amount of people playing, but that doesn't guarantee that the online is completely dead, although I wouldn't be surprised if it is. And that certainly highlights one of the problems with any kind of online play that you would want to integrate into a board game like this, is the fact that the online play is mostly only going to be good for playing against your own friends and family at scheduled times. You're not going to find a lot of random people willing to play. There is some exceptions to that. For instance, Uno still has a pretty decent fan base of people, and but there's an ever increasing number of cell phone games that try to compete. For instance, like Words with Friends came out way before Scrabble the Go came out, and so there's a kind of split player base there. So for that one game, I got Real Estate Agent as an achievement for buying and selling a house, winning a mini game when it comes to skill achievement, and Rags to Riches, collect over 300,000, which that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 achievements otherwise to get, and a final achievement for getting all the other achievements. So yeah, I imagine what I'm gonna do is play this game one more time for an episode in fast mode, short version that sets a random victory condition. We may play this multiple times actually, and then this is going to be just a relatively short series. At the moment I don't own the Game of Life 2, and it's, with its seasons pass, is probably just a little too expensive to justify paying full price to. But that would be the thing to compare it to, certainly, is would you want to play good old-fashioned Game of Life and have the experience I just had for this hour, which was fine but not particularly interesting, not very visually polished, they didn't put a lot of effort into the audio or the visuals or changing up the game at all, which I'm glad they didn't change the game for the people who really wanted to play classic Game of Life. But for everybody else, which I think there's a much larger audience, there should have been more going on there. Let's see, when I click on this, it doesn't do anything. It probably just tries to pop up the Steam overlay, which I have disabled. But yeah, I would say it's probably about 70% the fact that the Game of Life is boring that makes me not super enthusiastic about this game, and then 30% the Marmalade Studios treatment of it, which isn't bad. It's not crashing, it's not full of microtransactions, it's not wasting, it's not working terribly, but there definitely are some things that could have been polished more. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wish list. I just realized something here. You get 0 reward for being married. So why does it force you to get married? It's so odd, frankly. It forces you to get married so that you're married and so you can have kids. So why doesn't it just not start with you married in the first place? That is odd. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a good evening.